Hi, welcome back to Housing with Hillel. I've spoken a lot in this forum and on LinkedIn about the price of housing in Israel, but generally I'm referring to the price of purchases as opposed to rentals. Now obviously the two are very much connected, but they don't necessarily move at the same pace or the same magnitude or even always in the same direction. There are a lot of differences between the sales and rental market, but I want to focus on three major distinctions between the two. Number one, renting is more of a need. Number two, renters tend to move more frequently than buyers. And number three, the process for renting an apartment is much shorter than for purchasing one. I'll start with the first one. So let's take a step back and look at the rentals market in Israel overall. A rental apartment is almost always a place for someone to live in. Once in a while, you have people convert rental apartments into an office or a studio or a clinic, or even subletting it through Airbnb. Those are very much exceptions. For the most part, if someone's renting an apartment, it's because they need a place to live, and for whatever reason, it's either not possible or not relevant right now for them to purchase a place and live in it. According to the latest numbers, about a third of Israelis live in rental apartments. When purchasing a property, on the other hand, it could be to live in, or it could be an investment, or it could even be a vacation home. According to the Israeli Tax Authority, as of 2021, about 300,000 Israelis own multiple properties, while over 500 of them own 10 properties or more. If you take into consideration the fact that a lot of people illegally divide up apartments, or they put one of their apartments or multiple apartments in their children's names, that number is probably much, much higher. So since there's a decent chance that someone buying an apartment already owns another place, while the renter most likely needs a place to live in, their mindset will be very different. More than that, I'd say that most of my clients who are looking for rental, it's because they're moving to a new city, maybe they're moving to Israel for the first time, they just got married, or maybe their landlord is moving back into their apartment or just sold it and so they're kicking them out. So they need a place to live. Whereas clients are looking to purchase, it's because they want to settle down and plant their roots. It's because they want the financial stability, because they want to upgrade from a smaller place to a bigger place or something older to something newer. But people don't usually get kicked out of their rental apartments and say, well, I guess I'll just drop 2 or 3 million shekels tomorrow to buy a place instead of renting. And this leads to point number 2 from above. Renters tend to move more frequently. Sometimes it's because they have to, like I said before, if they're getting, kicked out of their apartment, or they, their landlord doesn't want to renew their contract. But also they move more frequently because they can, meaning there aren't as many associated costs with moving from rental as there are for purchasing. Obviously, the cost of a mover, making any necessary repairs, that adds up. But every time you buy and sell an apartment, there's purchasing taxes, maybe there's capital gains taxes, there's bank fees, there's lawyer fees, there's probably a realtor fee. That can come out to a lot of money if you're moving every couple of years. So from a purely financial standpoint, it's not worthwhile to sell and buy every few years unless you absolutely need to. The flip side of this is also true, by the way. A landlord more often needs renters to move in by a certain time, as opposed to sellers who often have more flexibility on when the sale can close by. Obviously, there's exceptions to this rule, but generally it's not worthwhile to leave a rental apartment open for a long time, especially if the landlord is paying a mortgage or is renting out so that they can rent, even if they have to drop the price slightly. Whereas for a seller, it's usually more important to get the right price as opposed to rushing into the sale. This connects to my third original point, that the rental process is generally much shorter than the purchasing process. Extreme cases, I've seen people literally show up to see an apartment for rent with a wad of cash in their hand and their ID ready to sign and move in right away. Whereas with purchasing, there's a lot more steps involved, especially if there's a mortgage involved. You can feel free to go back in my channel and see the episodes I had about the closing process, as well as the episode about the mortgage process. So the length of that process also means that changes in the real estate market will affect the prices more gradually, since people don't usually sell homes from one day to the next. Even if a big change happens in the economy or in the country in general, if a deal's already been agreed upon, chances are that the deal will go on. But because there are often a couple of months from the time of that handshake or even a signed agreement until the transfer of possession, the statistics on real estate prices are always delayed. COVID was a great example of that. Early on in the pandemic, when the economy came nearly to a halt, there were a lot fewer purchases closed, either because buyers and sellers' uncertainty, banks were closed, etc. But if you look at the numbers, there was never really a major drop in prices. With rentals, on the other hand, people who needed to move for the reasons I listed above often still needed to move. And a lot of people had lost their jobs, or there was a lot of uncertainty of what their income would look like moving forward. If you had already bought a place and were in that position, the banks were freezing mortgages, so you had some buffer space. What happened to rentals? So the rental market in Israel actually did go down to a certain extent over the course of COVID, at least in the early days. This was especially true in places like Tel Aviv and certain parts of Jerusalem that were very dependent on the foreign market and tourists. We at Trusted House manage a couple dozen apartments across Israel. And for all the ones whose contracts ended in that period, we actually lowered the asking price for those apartments. And for a lot of the people who are continuing to stay in the apartments, we lowered their prices as well so that they can continue affording the apartments that they were living in. And since the pandemic effectively ended, those prices have been able to move back much faster as well. This past year's inflation, some of those prices have been moving at crazy speed. The most was in Herzliya, where the price of 3-bedroom apartments went up about 25% over the course of 2022. And other markets had major swings the other way. According to data from the former head appraiser of Israel, 3-bedroom apartments for rent in Jerusalem went down by about 24% over the course of 2022. Now, I'm not going to dive specifically into those two numbers right now, but the point is that because of the 3 reasons above, be much more reactive to what's going on in the economy and in the country in general, and swing much more quickly than it does for sales. Bottom line, what will be the prices like for rentals in 2023? Of course, it's impossible to know, and as I said above, it can really differ from city to city. But in general, price for rentals tend to follow common sense. If there's a jump or a dip in the price of investment properties, then the price for rentals is going to move accordingly because investors are going to want to get a certain return on their investment. If there's a recession and a lot of people lose their jobs, like we saw previously, then good chance that rent will fall to a certain extent. And the flip side is true if there's going to be a boom in the economy. There's obviously a lot more to be said on the topic, but this video is already getting a bit long. If you have any general questions on the topic though, feel free to write them in the comments below. Or if you have a personal question, then you can feel free to drop me a DM or send me an email. Thanks so much for watching.